But we felt that since we're talking about pressures on publishers today, it might be a very good idea for us to chat a little bit about this and get some of these great folks' thoughts on this situation. And I'd like to start with my friend Sharif, because he is from the region that is heavily involved in the crisis at this point. Can you give us some idea, Sharif, of what you have been thinking as all of this has played out?
First of all, thank you for the introduction and thank you for being here for all of us. First, being here was also a problem. Just to be here or not, that was also one question that we had to answer. And first of all, I would like to say that nobody wants whatsoever any bloodshed of any side. But it also has to be fair when you look at things. You have to have a full 360 image, which I think it's very difficult to get these days. Whatever you're doing, it's always, there's one side talking more than the other or showing more than the other. And I think there's a lot of fake news we face these days. It's very obvious sometimes you don't see it except later. From my opinion, is to understand what's happening in this week or 10 days, you have to go back, I think, 75 years, as old as the book fair is. Where things started, how they started, how we look at things differently than others. Because, for instance, in Egypt, we had never had any problem with Jews. And up till now, we don't have any problem with Jews. Maybe Zionism is a problem for us, but not Jews. Jews lived very safely with the Arabs all through the life. Even the movies had always like a Muslim, Christian, Jew in it always. So it was never Judaism the problem. It may be what happened after that. And what happened after that, I think, has to do with what happened in Europe with World War II, with the Holocaust, with everything. And instead of facing it here, we had to import this to the Arab world or export it to the Arab world to deal with it for all this time. This is a very simple way to look at things, and all the development and all the, I mean, nothing is equal when you present. There is a side that has explained things in a very different way. I listen to international media, and it's like, I think it's very obvious what's happening, very, very obvious for everybody. And while we were having the opening of the Frankfurt Book Fair, there was a hospital that's being bombed on one side. So also, it doesn't make sense somehow. We don't want blood, we don't want this. There was a lot of solutions in the middle, nobody picked it up. So I don't know where this is going, but I don't see it going anywhere good for both sides for a long time from now. It's like we're playing, snake and ladders, and then you go all the way down to zero now. And you have to start somewhere, and nobody's winning. Sorry to say.
I think, and I'm sure we'll get into this as we talk about other pressures too, because I think you're hitting on a very interesting point, Sharif. Even when we can see that things should just stop, and everybody should just hold for a minute and go, what are we doing? Let's see if there's not some way to everyone step back and we talk. It doesn't happen. One of the great characteristics of the political tensions of this era is that they're happening with eyes wide open. It's almost like a slow train wreck, right? You can't take your eyes off it. And so everyone sees these things coming, moving, hitting them, and nothing changes. It's an extraordinary thing. I'm speaking now on a much more global level. The political crises in the United States, for example, where I'm from. Elections all over the world. We see these things moving, and yet we don't seem to be able to stop them. Or is it that we don't want to stop them? I think that's one of the great questions of this period.
Let me just add a little bit, because also at the opening, for instance, of the Frankfurt Book Fair, all the first part was only one-sided. If you want to have diversity, if you want to have people, you should listen to the other. If you want to have a dialogue, not one side talking to each other. So I think there should be a representation also of other voices of people explaining maybe how, as you said, things are seen on the other side, and maybe this brings the talk going. But if we're talking one side only, I mean, nothing happens. And then when someone spoke, it was a scandal. So
Sharif, let me come to you in the time we have. I want to ask you about self-censorship and about what you've talked to us about as being rather informal ways that the authority can pressure you, probably by skipping some of the authenticity of what you're doing, right? By overlooking it deliberately.
Well, I can take you back to the early 80s when I was young,
Yeah.
really young. And it was during the book fair. The January is always, Cairo Book Fair is always in January, and my father, who founded the publishing house, I was with him during the holiday of the mid-year there, and then the police came and they arrested him.
Yeah.
I was so young, I don't understand what's happening, but they came and they took him, and I mean, I don't remember that much after that, but I knew that he stayed for 60 days and then he was released. Whatever the reason, what has happened, because my father was also involved in politics, and he was, by the way, also he was one of the founders of Dar al-Arabي, which means the young Arab publishing, the young children Arab publishing house in Lebanon, which was a way of defending the Palestine cause at that time by educating children how things are. So apart from all the politics, this is how I was raised, and in a book fair where I saw my father taken away because of books. So all this now, when we talk, I mean, as Strasbourg said, we all have the fear. We don't want to be involved into, we want to do what we want, but we have this. So you always have this fight inside you first, and then with the team, and then with the bigger team, and then with everything. And to a certain extent, things are not that safe for you. I mean, we have publishers who've been arrested, who've been imprisoned, so you have this invisible fence that we see sometimes, and you have to think, should I or shouldn't I? So we try to push the ceiling that we have as much as we can. But sometimes there are direct and indirect ways. In Egypt, we don't have censorship. Officially, we don't have any censorship. We just can write whatever you want. But you have to obtain an ISBN, which is also a point where things can stop there. And when the book is out, you can just have to remove it. And one more thing that we don't publish for Egypt, we publish for the Arab world, so you have to think of the rest. Maybe a book in Egypt doesn't have a problem, but will be a problem in Saudi or Morocco. Maps are a big problem on any book, because the different, of course, borders of every country. So sometimes you have to omit the map totally, not to go into this if it's not that important in the book. And lots of things can happen. See, time is running.